It started like any other taping of The View. The New York studio was bright with lights. The audience buzzed with excitement, and the co-hosts took their seats with coffee mugs in hand and friendly smiles. It was supposed to be a normal show light. Politics, celebrity gossip, and a few laughs. But that morning, something was different. You could feel it in the air. Tense, charged, Whoopi Goldberg, known for her sharp mind and bold opinions, sat a little quieter than usual. She wore her signature flowing layers, her glasses low on her nose, but behind her calm appearance, her eyes were focused, calculating. She was waiting. The show started with jokes from Joy Behar and policy chat from Alyssa Farah Griffin. Sunny? Hostin offered her usual legal insight, and Sarah N. brought in some statistics. The crowd responded warmly. Everything seemed normal until the discussion turned toward education. More specifically about what parents should have the right to control in their children's school curriculum. That's when Whoopi sat up straighter, her hand tightening around her mug. The others noticed. Joy threw out a joke about banning math homework. A few people laughed. Then Sunny added something about respecting parental rights when it came to what students learn about race, gender, and history. That's when Whoopi leaned forward. Slowly, she removed her glasses and placed them on the table. "I'm going to say something that might not sit right with a lot of people," she said, her voice calm but firm. The studio went quiet. Even the audience stopped shifting in their seats. Sometimes, parents are not the best people to decide what their kids should learn. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Joy blinked. Alyssa looked stunned. Sarah leaned back in her chair, unsure what to say. Whoopi continued, her voice steady. Sometimes the truth needs to be taught, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. There was silence, then awkward shifting. You could see the producers in the booth, scrambling, whispering frantically into their headsets. Sunny tried to smooth things over. "What kind of truth are we talking about, Whoopi?" But Whoopi wasn't finished. "I mean, real truth," she said. "If we leave it up to every parent, some kids will never learn about slavery, or the Holocaust, or science, or why certain groups were kept out of history books for decades." The tension rose. The audience was split. Some clapped nervously. Others stayed completely still. Joy tried to jump in. "Well, there's a difference between protecting and censoring, right?" But Whoopi wasn't letting go. Her tone grew stronger. "There's also a difference between guidance and control. Parents banning books because they don't want to answer hard questions at the dinner table. That's not love. That's fear. And fear doesn't teach, it isolates." The panel froze. Even the cameras seemed confused about where to focus. Should they stay on Whoopi or cut to commercial? Then she said it. "I've seen this before," she said quietly. "Project Violet." Buried but not forgotten. Silence. The producers didn't understand what she meant. Most of the hosts didn't either. The audience had no idea. But for a brief second, a flicker of something passed across Sunny's face recognition. Before anyone could ask, the segment was abruptly cut. ABC went to a commercial. When they returned, Whoopi was gone. No explanation, no mention. Just a smiling Joy, nervously carrying on with celebrity news. But by then, it was too late. The moment had already been clipped and shared on social media. Within 6 hours, it was trending worldwide. Whoopi explodes on The View. Goldberg banned from set? Did Whoopi just get canceled? But hidden in the chaos, in the hundreds of thousands of reposts and tweets, was one quiet question whispered in the corners of the internet. What is Project Violet? The backlash came fast. By noon, every major news outlet was running headlines. Whoopi sparks firestorm on live TV. The View erupts over Goldberg's anti-parent statement. Whoopi crosses the line again. The internet split into two angry camps. One side accused her of disrespecting family values. while the other hailed her as a truth-teller standing up against political censorship. But most people missed one key detail. Her final sentence, Project Violet, buried but not forgotten. It sounded like nonsense, a strange phrase, maybe even a slip of the tongue. But to a small circle of people in Washington, it was far from meaningless. Inside a quiet office in a glass-covered building not far from Capitol Hill, a man named Adrian Cale froze when he heard the clip. He rewound it, played it again. Project Violet. He hadn't heard that name in 18 years. He picked up his encrypted phone and dialed a secure number. "She said it," he whispered. On live television, on the other end, a voice answered quickly. "Did she give details?" "No, just the name." "But she knows something." The line went silent. Came two words: "Contain it." Meanwhile, back at ABC Studios, panic was setting in. The executive producer of The View, Monica Jensen, was in a heated call with the network's legal team. They wanted the segment pulled from the internet. They wanted the statement labeled unscripted and not representative of ABC's views, but they couldn't stop the clip. It was already everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And people weren't just watching, they were asking questions. By evening, conspiracy forums lit up. Some claimed Project Violet was a secret education program the government used to erase parts of American history. Others said it was a CIA operation connected to the rewriting of textbooks during the Cold War. Few posts claimed it was tied to psychological conditioning in schools. The theories got wilder by the minute. But buried among them was a thread written by someone using the name HV71. It read, "Project Violet wasn't a theory. I was part of it. Public schools in 5 states. Mid-90s. We were told it was a historical sanitization test. They wanted to see how much you could delete from a curriculum before anyone noticed. We deleted civil rights protests, labor strikes, and entire Native American histories. They called it Violet because the ink they used to stamp edited files was purple. I still have one." The post was deleted within an hour. By midnight, Whoopi was trending in 37 countries, but she wasn't talking. She hadn't responded to calls, texts, or even messages from her publicist. According to ABC Security, she had left the building without speaking to anyone and hadn't been seen since. The studio's official statement was short. Today's comments by Ms. Goldberg were made off script and do not reflect the views of The View or its staff. We are reviewing the segment and will determine appropriate next steps. The next morning, something stranger happened. A low-ranking Department of Education official in Indiana was found dead. No foul play was mentioned, but one local paper quoted police who said the man's garage was lined with old-school records dating back to 1995. That afternoon, a new clip of Whoopi surfaced. It wasn't aired footage, was leaked from inside the dressing room. A staffer had filmed her on their phone minutes before the show. In the clip, she's pacing nervously, talking to herself. They'll bury it again, like they did before. But not this time. If I say the name, someone will remember. Someone always does. The clip ends with her looking into the mirror. "You want the truth? Say Violet." The internet exploded again. People began combing through old newspaper archives, education board reports, even declassified CIA documents. Still, no one had found anything official. But one thing was certain. Whoopi hadn't just sparked a national debate. She had triggered something deeper, darker. And in the quiet back rooms of government offices, her name was now listed next to a file number. Not under celebrity, not under media, but under threat monitoring. The third day felt different. Morning news shows were no longer focused on debates over education or whether Whoopi Goldberg had gone too far. Now they were filled with unwhispers about something beneath the surface. The phrase Project Violet was no longer just a trending hashtag. It had entered the national conversation, and no one knew what it meant, except a few. At a coffee shop in Bethesda, Maryland, a woman in her 60s sat nervously by the window. Her name was Dr. Lena Marsh, a retired curriculum developer who had once worked for a government subcommittee on educational materials in the late 90s. She sipped her tea and stared at her phone. A message blinked on her screen from a private email address. She said it. "They're coming. You need to disappear." She closed her eyes, muttered "too late," and slid a USB stick under her napkin. Outside, a man in a dark coat stepped out of a car and entered the coffee shop. Back in New York, Whoopi Goldberg was still missing. ABC's official statement claimed she was taking medical leave, but sources on the inside told a different story. Security footage showed Whoopi being escorted from the building by two unknown men the day after the taping. They weren't network employees, their IDs didn't scan. And by the time security noticed, the footage had been wiped clean remotely. The only reason anyone knew they were there was because a janitor, curious about the strange silence on the normally chaotic set, took a photo of the hallway monitor before it went dark. It showed Whoopi between the two men, calm but visibly tense. The image leaked onto Reddit that afternoon. The post was titled simply, "She knew what she was doing." Theories multiplied. Some said she was taken by government agents. Others believed she was in hiding. And a few insisted she was now under voluntary protective custody after revealing state secrets. But for Adrian Kale, the man in Washington who had triggered the initial containment call, things were getting complicated. The Project Violet file was supposed to be sealed, not just classified erased. That's what made it different. It didn't exist in any digital archive. Only 3 physical copies remained, stored in separate parts of the country. One of them, he now realized, had likely just surfaced again. In a secure room inside a gray government building, Adrian stared at a screen, showing the leaked clip of Whoopi's dressing room monologue. They'll bury it again, like they did before, but not this time. He paused the video and tapped a small green folder labeled Violet Legacy. Inside were scanned documents from 1996 education reform pilot programs, psychological behavior trials in middle school students, notes about curriculum deletions, altered textbooks, and references to emotive compliance tracking. There was also a list of people involved in the original project: educators, scientists, media liaisons. One name was circled in red: Lena Marsh. He leaned back. "If she's talking," he muttered, "we're already behind." Later that night, a late upload shook everything again. Someone anonymously posted an audio recording titled "The Violet Tapes -1. It featured a female voiceover, tired but sharp. Many believed it was Dr. Marsh. "We thought we were helping," the voice said. "We were told kids were too angry, too depressed. That history made them feel unsafe. So we sanitized, removed rebellion, softened depression, erased the fire, and left only ashes." But they didn't stop there. They wanted a generation that wouldn't question authority, that wouldn't remember who they were. We weren't reforming education. We were dismantling it. We called it Violet because it sounded harmless. Within hours, the file had millions of listens. The media couldn't ignore it anymore. CNN ran a segment titled, "Was Project Violet Real?" Fox News called it leftist mind control or just another conspiracy. But the more the networks argued, the more people began digging. Internet sleuths matched fragments from old education board documents. Teachers from across the country came forward, remembering strange curriculum reviews from the 90s where whole chapters were deleted without explanation. By now, it wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. And yet, one question remained. Why now? Why did Whoopi, of all people, bring this up? And who had told her about Project Violet in the first place? In a small, flickering corner of the deep web, a new post appeared from the user HV7, one the same whistleblower who had posted earlier before vanishing. "There's more. You think this is about books? Wait until you find out what they taught." Instead, the post ended with a countdown. 72 hours. Then silence. The clock was ticking. The countdown posted by the mysterious user HV71 had the internet on fire. What would happen in 72 hours? A leak? A name? Confession? No one knew. But what they did know was this. Project Violet was not just an old education reform initiative. It was something darker, systemic, intentional, and still active. By the second day, independent journalists and whistleblower forums had traced faint trails, leading to a company called Echelon Learning Systems. It was an educational technology firm that had once partnered with multiple state school boards in the late 90s and early 2000s. Their name had since vanished from the public record, absorbed into shell corporations, rebranded, erased. But someone had kept receipts. One of them was Nico Varela, a cyber investigative reporter based in São Paulo, Brazil. He had stumbled across Project Violet 3 years earlier while researching textbook censorship in South America. Back then, no one listened. But now, with Whoopi's words opening a national wound, Nico's old findings were being seen with new eyes. He reopened his case file. His notes included strange psychological surveys administered to students in the U.S., Canada, and even parts of Europe disguised as emotional health diagnostics. But the questions weren't medical. They were ideological, probing beliefs, testing political reflexes, measuring compliance. The surveys had been buried under layers of academic language, repackaged as adaptive curriculum behavior research. The documents bore one recurring code, VLT Dindigo 4. Nico stared at the code. His fingers hovered over his keyboard. Then he began typing an open letter and expose detailing how governments use seemingly innocent education reforms to normalize silence, obedience, and cognitive softening. He scheduled the article for global release in 48 hours. In New York, the studio where The View was taped sat under quiet lockdown. No statement had been made about Whoopi's disappearance. Her name was scrubbed from a BC's press page. But inside the network, panic was setting in. Joy Behar arrived early that morning, her face pale. She pulled producer Mark Holden into her dressing room. "Mark," she whispered, "this is bigger than you think. I found something in my desk drawer, something that wasn't there before." She handed him a folded piece of paper. It read, "They let you talk about everything, except the roots." W.G. Mark froze. He had been with the show for 12 years. He knew Whoopi's handwriting. The note was fresh. She had somehow left it there, maybe just before being taken. Mark rushed to the control room. "Pull up the off-air footage. So 10 seconds after we went to break." A technician hesitated. "That section's been flagged by legal. Pull it anyway." Played the feed. In it, Whoopi stood and reached under the table. Her mic was still live. She mouthed something, but the audio glitched. Static. Interference. Then just. Before the feed went black, her final words came through. "Tell Lena." The leak wasn't ours. Mark blinked. "Lena? Who's Lena?" Joy answered quietly. "I think she's the woman who started all of this." Meanwhile, Dr. Lena Marsh was on the move. After leaving the coffee shop in Maryland, she had gone dark. No phone. No cards, just a train ticket to Chicago and a small leather notebook filled with names, dates, and something even more valuable, a partial list of schools that had participated in Project Violet without knowing. She checked into a motel under the name Joan Lasky, a reference to her mother's favorite author. That night, she opened the notebook and flipped to a page marked with red ink. December 12, 2001, Virginia Pilot Program, 7th grade. Memory suppression unit test. Next to it, a single line. Result: elevated docility. Lowered response to stimulus of injustice. She closed her eyes. She remembered that trial. She remembered the children. She remembered what they had done to silence them when a few began asking questions. She picked up her pen and began writing her full confession. The truth was, Project Violet hadn't ended. It had evolved. Elsewhere, the clock hit 24 hours. The countdown on HV71's post updated. The screen turned black, then displayed a flickering symbol, half a violet flower, half an eye. A new post appeared. Marsh was the architect. Goldberg was the whistle, but the real voice is still missing. The student who survived the first test, she's alive, she remembers. The message ended with coordinates somewhere in Denver. And then the final line? You erased her name from the records, but you couldn't erase the memory you failed to kill. The world was watching, and the silence of 20 years was cracking. Tomorrow, the whole truth might come out. Or it might disappear again. The news cycle had shifted. What began as a live TV controversy had turned into a national obsession. Every media outlet, right, independent, was now covering Project Violet. But most were doing it wrong. They framed it as a conspiracy theory, a fringe story stirred up by overactive online communities. But in truth, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. In Denver, a small private law firm received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a Polaroid photo of a girl, age 13, with a note taped to the back that read, File number 71398B, Violet candidate. Memory reported intact. The girl in the photo was Maya Jansen, a former student in the 2001 Virginia pilot program. At the time, she had been marked as non-responsive to indoctrination cues. She was considered a failure of the system, a risk. Now, she was 37, living under a different name, and hiding in plain sight. Maya had tried to forget. For decades, she buried the memories of that year, the classroom with no windows, the strange tests, the daily recordings of her dreams. But something about Whoopi Goldberg's words had triggered it. Like someone scratching a scar she thought had healed. When her face began circulating in underground forums after the HV71 post, she panicked. And then she remembered the code they gave her as a child. If you ever hear the words Project Violet, you are not safe. She ran. At the same time, in Chicago, Dr. Lena Marsh finished her confession. 37 pages, handwritten. She scanned each one using a burner laptop and uploaded them to a secure server. Setting the release time to 5 p.m. Eastern, the file would contain everything. The names of government officials who funded the behavioral trials, the schools that participated, the media figures paid to bury the story. But it also included one thing more dangerous than all of it: a list of successful subjects, kids who didn't resist, kids who adapted perfectly to the conditioning, adults now working quietly in government, education, and law enforcement. Lena didn't know how many of them even realized what had been done to them, but one name stood out: Agent Caleb Rourke, Homeland Security. It was listed as Violet Type C, high absorption, low emotional response. She stared at his profile for a long time. Then she picked up a prepaid phone and dialed. In Washington, Agent Caleb Rourke was already tracking her. He had picked up Whoopi Goldberg 3 days earlier, not as a threat, but as a variable. She had broken the unspoken rule: don't reference Project Violet ever. Her statement on The View had been flagged instantly by a federal AI keyword scanner. Within 90 seconds, a containment protocol was issued. But the more he watched her interrogation footage, the more unsettled he became. She wasn't lying. She wasn't unstable. She knew. And now, as Lena's confession countdown ticked away, his assignment shifted. Find her, silence her before the file goes live. Somewhere deep in his subconscious, a memory stirred, faint and buried. A classroom, a question. A girl named Maya. His fingers trembled as he typed her name into a classified database. Match found. His breath caught. He stared at the photo. It was her. She was in the program too, and he had forgotten. He stood up slowly from his desk, Something was breaking inside him. Something they had taught him never to feel. Meanwhile, the internet hit a fever pitch. Hashtag Project Violet was now the top trend worldwide. Journalists began connecting the dots between educational data harvesting and sudden changes in curriculum policies across multiple states. Anonymous teachers posted stories of unexplained audits, book removals, and forced compliance training, sessions tied to companies like Echelon. Then, at 4:51 p.m., 9 minutes before Lena's scheduled release, ABC's main studio feed was hijacked. The screen went dark. A voice played over the signal, calm, clear, female, you're watching. This because you've been lied to. This isn't about education, it's about memory. And the right to shape the future by erasing the past. Then the image shifted to a split screen. On one side, Whoopi Goldberg, sitting in a dark room, alive but not free. On the other, Maya Jansen, holding a note with one word written in red marker. Truth. Lena watched from her motel room. Her finger hovered over the final upload button. Then her phone rang. A voice whispered, "You were right." It was Agent Rourke. "I think they used me too." She didn't say anything. He continued, "Don't trust anyone. They're coming for you and for her." The line went dead, and outside her window, a black SUV pulled into the lot. The clock struck 5 o'clock, and the upload bar reached 100%. The truth was out, but at what cost? The moment the file went live, the internet broke. It didn't start with headlines, it started with silence. For the first 3 minutes, most major news sites went dark. Live feeds on YouTube froze. News anchors received emergency scripts from unknown sources telling them to pause coverage of unverified cyber events. But it was too late. Lena Marsh's confession file had already been downloaded by thousands of activists, journalists, teachers, whistleblowers. It spread like wildfire across encrypted channels, Reddit, and even gaming forums disguised as patch updates. The file wasn't just text, it was video. Grainy footage showed rows of children sitting silently in sterile white rooms, their eyes fixed on blinking screens while soft, mechanical voices repeated phrases like, "Feel less," "Learn more, obey patterns," "Questioning breaks trust," "Family is fragile, nation is forever." In one clip, a small boy cried. The audio was barely audible, but you could hear him whisper, "I want to go home." A woman's voice, "Off camera," replied coldly, "This is your home now." It wasn't just horror. It was proof. And it confirmed what Whoopi Goldberg had risked everything to say. There had been a deliberate effort to reshape the minds of children across the U.S. Hiding behind education reform, behavioral therapy, and future readiness. The fallout was instant. In New York, The View went into emergency shutdown. The studio was surrounded by DHS vehicles by 8:30 p.m., and every employee's phone was confiscated. Whoopi had vanished. Producers claimed she was escorted out for safety, but leaked footage showed her being loaded into a black van. Her wrists restrained. ABC issued a vague statement about ongoing investigations into digital misinformation. But the audience had already made up its mind. She wasn't a disruptor. She was a messenger. In Virginia, Maya Jansen hid in a farmhouse with no Wi-Fi. An old friend from the program, Jamal, had found her and brought her to safety. He too had remembered. And the memory hit him like a dam breaking. The color-coded wristbands, the smell of bleach, the sound of doors locking from the outside. They weren't bad kids, they were experiments. They were fugitives. Meanwhile, Agent Caleb Rourke stood in the middle of a server room in Washington, watching the file upload logs. His hands shook as he read Lena's final page, the part that mentioned him by name. He had been used as a monitor. His job wasn't just to follow threats, it was to neutralize memories. His file said, high absorption, low empathy, ideal for long-term suppression tasks. He whispered to himself, I don't even know who I am. He looked at his reflection in the glass of the server door and asked a terrifying question. What if everything I believe has been placed there? Then his phone buzzed. A single text. No sender ID. Too late, Caleb. The reactivation begins now. Before he could respond, the lights flickered. The servers went dark. By midnight, chaos had reached the highest levels. The Secretary of Education resigned. The CDC issued a cryptic statement disavowing all psychological trials conducted under Project Violet. And in an emergency session, the Senate Intelligence Committee scheduled hearings to begin within 48 hours. But none of it could undo what had been revealed. A government-backed memory manipulation initiative. Thousands of children exposed and monitored for decades. Key players still active in government, media, and law enforcement. Lena Marsh was gone. The motel room she used had been emptied by the time local police arrived. But she had left, behind one last clue, a napkin pinned to the wall with a kitchen knife. On it, one word, Phase 2. The final twist came not from the government, but from the public. A grassroots movement began forming online. Former Violet candidates began identifying each other using code phrases from their childhoods. They called themselves the Recovered. They weren't angry. They were organized, and they wanted justice. As morning approached, Caleb Rourke made a choice. He stepped out of his apartment building, burner phone in hand, and called an encrypted number. I want to help, he said. Not them, the others. The voice on the other end was Maya. I don't trust you, she said. You shouldn't, Caleb replied. But I remember now. A long silence. Then, meet us in Nashville. No weapons, no lies. Click. Caleb stood in the early dawn air, unsure what the next 24 hours would bring. But for the first time, he wasn't following orders. He was following the truth. And the war for memory had just begun. The hearing chamber in Washington was packed beyond capacity. Media from across the globe hovered outside like sharks sensing blood in the water. Inside, marble walls echoed with tension. At the center sat a panel of stone-faced senators flanked by restless aides and guarded by federal agents who now questioned their own orders. It had been 3 days since Lena Marsh's confession had gone public. 3 days since the words Project Violet became more feared than any foreign threat. And now the American people wanted answers. Cameras rolled as the first witness was brought in, not a politician, not a general, but a civilian, Maya Jansen. Dressed simply, hair pulled back, Maya stepped forward and took her seat before the microphone. She was no longer hiding in a farmhouse. She was no longer a silent survivor. She was now the face of a generation whose memories had been edited, tested, suppressed. State your name for the record, the chairman asked. She didn't flinch. Maya Elise Jansen. And your relation to the subject under investigation. She looked straight at the cameras. I was one of them, a Violet candidate. I was taken when I was 6 years old. Gasps rippled through the room. What followed was an emotional, hour-long testimony that recounted her time in the facilities, her inability to form long-term memory until the age of 15, her repetitive dreams about silent teachers, and her sudden recall when she saw Whoopi Goldberg mention the phrase on national television. But what shook the chamber most were her closing words. You made us forget what it means to belong to ourselves. You tried to turn us into machines that follow, obey, and forget. But the mind remembers. The heart remembers. And now does the country. The room stood still. Then the senators began their questioning, some skeptical, some desperate. To save face, others secretly afraid their own pasts might be unearthed next. That's when the second shock came. A surprise witness, Whoopi Goldberg. Despite the network's reporting, she had been detained indefinitely. She walked in escorted by a small legal team and a constitutional lawyer who had been part of the Watergate investigations decades earlier. She took her seat beside Maya and quietly nodded to her, eyes moist but firm. The room erupted in flashes and whispers. Whoopi calmly leaned into the mic. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm a storyteller. I told a story on live television that people tried to erase. A dot. I didn't speak alone. I spoke for every student, every parent, and every teacher who felt something wasn't right but couldn't say why. Now we know why. A senator interrupted. Ms. Goldberg, are you claiming the media knew about Project Violet? She nodded. Not everyone, but enough to keep the truth off the airwaves. I've had scripts pulled, interviews censored, footage scrubbed from archives. This wasn't just a government failure. It was a national collaboration of silence. Okay, May. By now, the hearing was broadcast to over 60 million people live. Twitter had collapsed under traffic. Hashtags like #WeRemember and #VioletTruth were trending worldwide. Then, as if on cue, Caleb Rourke entered the chamber. The man once tasked with memory suppression now held a briefcase in his hands, handcuffed. To his wrist, side were documents, names, timelines, archived footage. And the program's original budget logs, signed off by 3 senators still in office. One of them sat on the panel. The chamber erupted in chaos as Caleb placed the case on the desk. The senator stood, yelling, "This is treason. You have no authority." But no one listened anymore. Security escorted him out. That was the tipping point. The hearing was declared historic. Indictments followed within 24 hours. 4 major networks issued apologies. The Department of Education announced a full audit of its history and ethics curriculum. And in schools across the country, students and teachers began holding open forums called memory circles, sharing forgotten family stories, suppressed histories, and cultural truths that had been buried for too long. Outside the Capitol, thousands gathered silently, each wearing a violet ribbon. Maya and Whoopi joined them, standing side by side, no longer afraid. Whoopi whispered. I was never supposed to be part of this story, Maya replied. But you were the first voice they couldn't silence. And as the sun began to set behind the Capitol dome, one truth remained. They had tried to erase memory, but in the end, memory fought back. And this time, it won.